months since Janet Napolitano announced she was resigning from Obama's cabinet as head of the DHS. She left office early last month. So who's taking her place? Well, President Obama announced just about 2 hours ago that Jeh Johnson, former head counsel for the Pentagon, will be taking over if he's confirmed. Here to give us some insight on this nomination, what we can expect and what he can expect, Julie Myers-Wood, former Assistant Homeland Security Secretary during the Bush administration, and Spencer Ackerman, the national security editor at The Guardian. Julie, we were talking about this during the break. You were a special assistant to President Bush, helping to come up with the short list of nominees after the Bernie Kerik discussion exploded. Michael Chertoff ultimately got it. Now, he did not have a tremendous amount of management experience, even though he'd been head of the criminal division at the Justice Department. Why was he the right man for the job, and compare him to Jeh Johnson?
Sure, and I think there are a lot of similarities between Secretary Chertoff and Jeh Johnson. Chertoff was the right man for the job because he's incredibly smart, and DHS has a lot of very difficult issues, a lot of first impression issues, and he can look at those and decide them very quickly.
So it's a lot. You really need to be able to make snap judgments.
Well, to make judgments quickly, you can't mull over things for years. DHS is not the kind of agency where you can do that. Chertoff also had successfully navigated the interagency community, something that Jeh Johnson has done at the Department of Defense, and they were both former prosecutors from the Southern District of New York. And so I think ultimately President Bush thought that background would give Secretary Chertoff a real leg up and help him bring together this agency, and I think he did so.
And Spencer, we've had two governors serve in that role, Tom Ridge of Pennsylvania, Napolitano of Arizona. Is it important to have a big experience with a big sprawling bureaucracy? Because that's what this job is.
It has to be important. This is one of the most unwieldy agencies in the federal government. It faces a lot right now, existential questions about should it even persist in the form that we know it as. It's very easy to come into DHS and know a whole lot about one thing that it does: cybersecurity, aviation security, immigration. It's very rare, and in fact, we haven't really had it yet, for a DHS secretary to know everything, or at least most things about everything DHS does.
And tell us what you think about Jeh Johnson. You think he could be effective in this?
Fascinating choice. Johnson has a very rounded background inside a lot of the very important national security law issues that he faced at the Pentagon. For someone to run an agency like this, even with the management questions, he knows a lot, as we were just discussing, about the interagency process. That's going to be really important. And this will be a test of how perhaps a different background for an agency whose existence is very much in play might turn out to be an agent of change.
What do you think?
Absolutely. I think his background at DOD and his experience, frankly, dealing with cybersecurity issues is going to be absolutely critical. DHS and DOD are in a lot of disagreements over how cybersecurity, one of the biggest threats to our national security, should be handled. He's been right in the middle of that, and I think he could be very effective in helping kind of bridge the gap. The other thing that I think, when you look at his speeches, he's a very thoughtful guy, and he's good at looking at emerging issues, and you've got to have that for a DHS leader. And so I think he could be a good choice, particularly with the appointment of DHS DepSec Ali Mayorkas. You really need somebody with his immigration background, and I hope they confirm him quickly. I think together they could be a good team.
This is actually one of the more fascinating things about the Johnson appointment from a counterterrorism perspective. Johnson's been one of the leftward poles, you might say, of the administration's internal dialogue about what to do about the war on terrorism, and gave this fascinating speech late last year before he left the Pentagon about envisioning a time and a circumstance where there is no longer a perpetual global war against al-Qaeda, and that's not really something the government's been very prepared to talk about or even envision. What does victory actually look like? And Johnson took a public position on that, saying it's really almost for internal consumption as well as public consumption. It's okay to envision a time in which the U.S. moves beyond this and does so successfully. The fascinating thing, you don't really get the sense that DHS is going to be the player influencing that conversation internally.
Well, with him in place, DHS could be. I think if he's the secretary and he has a voice, he could be the player.
But isn't that something that Bush administration officials especially might be not excited to hear about, somebody talking about the end of the war on al-Qaeda, given that there still is this existential threat from al-Qaeda and affiliated groups like al-Shabaab?
Well, I think certainly, Jay Johnson might give a different speech today than he did a few months ago. I think the recent events have shown that we're not yet to an end game, but you have to think about what's the end game. Are we moving there? And I think having a secretary that has a big voice in this discussion is important. The one management challenge I'll say, and I do think he faces a lot of management challenges, is how do you manage empty chairs? And DHS has so many vacancies. And so in order for him to be effective as a secretary, you've got to fill in those senior level positions. Otherwise, Obama is not going to be able to move his agenda forward.
Final thought?
Julie made a really great point about cybersecurity. This is going to be increasingly important to what DHS becomes, as right now counterterrorism is to what it is. Cybersecurity faces a lot of questions about who does what. Who protects the civilian internet? Who protects data security on a business infrastructure? And particularly the military facing a lot of questions about whether it should do more in that space as opposed to simply protecting military networks and conducting outward threats against foreign adversaries, particularly when most cybersecurity threats are about data exfiltration. It's really going to be fascinating to see how a former Pentagon official at senior levels is able to negotiate this with the Pentagon.
Fascinating stuff. Spencer, Julie, thanks so much for coming in. We appreciate it.